So we're in this series, Unlikely Heroes, and I am jumping in with Peter. Who is Peter? What does it look like? One of the things that was pretty powerful to me was just the prophetic word that Chris shared fits really in line with kind of where we're headed in light of who Peter is and what's happening. So I was reading a book not too long ago called Canoeing the Mountains. And the book Canoeing the Mountains captures Lewis and Clark's kind of expedition where they crossed the Mississippi River and they had this following of people that wanted to explore and wanted to keep going and wanted to make it happen. So as they followed them, they trusted Lewis and Clark. They know how to navigate. They know their understanding. They know kind of how to go about this. And then they hit the Rocky Mountains. And as they started going up the Rocky Mountains, they just assumed it would be like another river and assumed they would hit the Pacific Ocean at one point. So they started carrying the canoes up the mountains. And then they hit this kind of period of, I think we're going to have to ditch the canoes. I don't think this is what's going to get me there. Everything I had understood until then made sense, but now I'm going to have to ditch the canoes. And I love this understanding of this is the life of Peter. Peter had this moment where he had a canoe and he's walking along and he understands what Jesus is telling him. Then all of a sudden he hits a place where he doesn't think that the canoe is going to go up that mountain. I think all of us have this. All of us have this canoe mountain type mentality sometimes where we hit something and we just don't know if we can move any further along the path. Everything that we had previously known was now in total chaos. Everything that we had previously known was now really blurry for us. And Peter walks this journey. We really are just going to walk through some of the life of Peter. And what I love about Lewis and Clark is when they hit the mountains, they had some options, right? One was, let's go back to where the canoes worked. We know how to do that. Maybe we can go down and around and try to figure some other way out. They could just say, hey, you know what? Colorado's not bad. Let's chill here for a bit. It seems like in a few years, everybody's going to vacation here. So let's just chill here, right? Or, no, I think where I'm headed's worth it. I think it's worth, let's push on. Let's ditch the canoes. And I don't think you understand, like, ditching the canoes wasn't just, yeah, that makes sense. That is everything to them. And let's make it over this mountain. We see this kind of pull up, so you can either retreat, withdraw, or you can kind of relearn and re-engage and kind of continue going on in this. And Peter's journey is just like this. We always heard, and I always have understood Peter to be a coward. Whoever's heard, like, Peter was a coward at one point. You ever heard that? Has anybody? Okay, so I thought that, and nobody else did. And so we're going to journey into this because I love in John 18. In John 18:10, I'm going to prove to you he wasn't a coward. Then I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. But John 18:10. So this is when they are in this place. They're in the garden. And the Roman soldiers have come to take Jesus. And in John 18:10, it says this, then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. Okay, if you can go into 12, I'm just going to jump over to 12 real quick. So the band of soldiers and their captain, right? So Peter, hanging out with Jesus and the other disciples, this band of soldiers comes up, and the dude pulls out a sword and goes after the Roman army. That's not cowardly. Like, that's like, whoa, like, he just took some massive weaponry towards the Roman, like, that's big. And I always read about his denial, and I don't ever read about this where he stepped up and basically took on the Roman government for what he believed. He crossed over the Mississippi River. He went up to that Rocky Mountain and said, and we're going to keep going. I love this mindset of it's a different type of Peter where he believed in who he was. He believed in this is the call that we're given. This is what I should step into. This is how I should go about this. He whipped out a sword and cut a Roman. I mean, this is huge. Let's keep reading in verse 11. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" This would have been the huge thing. This is Jesus saying to Peter, everything you believed, everything you thought this fight was about, everything that you had kind of journeyed on, that's not how this is going to be done. Peter now goes into ultimate chaos. No, this is what we had been training for 3 years. This is what this was about. This is the kind of leader that you were. This is how we were going to win this. This is how we were going to make all of this happen, was to fight this way. And now, you're going to hear me in a minute, I think his denial of Jesus is now inevitable at this point. When Jesus says, it's not what we're doing, dude. That's not the fight. You took a sword to the Roman army, and he's just like, no, not how we're going to handle this one, Peter. You can just imagine, what? How many here have ever spent, even if it's been hours, but maybe weeks or even years, and you've developed a product, or you worked on a project for school, or you've done something around the house that you're really proud of, and you can't wait to show your wife, or you can't wait to turn into your teacher, or your boss has been waiting for this year thing, and you bring them into it, and you're like, look at this project, look at what I've been working on. They're like, oh. Everything in you is like, go away. Everything in you is frustrated. It puts you into total, am I not good enough? What? Did I misunderstand something? Was I too dumb to get what you were talking about? Why is this? I remember in school, I was in master's class trying to learn something about the book of Genesis or something, and as we were going through, we were talking about all the ways that the creation story could have happened, right? And I'm just sitting there talking, and one of the projects that I had to create was all of these, the 4 different possible creation narrative theologies. You don't care anything about this. But I wrote this whole thing out, and I turned in a project that took me probably 20 hours to complete. And it was like my final grade, turned it in, and I get the thing back, and it says, "Caleb, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. How dare you hold to this theory? After everything I had ever taught you, and I showed you the Hebrew, and why? How could you please care about the Bible?" And just on and on. And I was like, I got a 97, but that wasn't the point. So he was just hammering me because the work was fine. Apparently, I just didn't read the Bible right. And so as I was reading, I'm like, oh my gosh, am I too dumb? Did I miss it? Did I understand? Like everything in me started this chaos of, I shouldn't even be in school anymore. I should drop out completely. It really hit this thing of, I can't even listen to a teacher. Everything put me in total chaos. And I remember going through, that was over the kind of the Christmas break, and wondering if I would even go back. Because he didn't just say, no, that's not right. He demoralized me. He pulled out everything that I had thought who I was, and my identity, and what I valued, and how I approached it. This is what happens when Jesus says to Peter, that's not how we're going to fight. Peter's going, no, for 3 years, this is what we were preparing for. Everything that you had been talking about, this is what it was about. This is how we were going to win this. I don't get it. And he throws them into complete chaos. So like I said, I think this is when Peter's denial of Jesus was inevitable. I honestly don't think it was this cowardly act. I think it was, I truly don't know who he is anymore. I don't know what it's about anymore. I don't want to be associated because that's not the one I followed for 3 years. We read this in John 18:15 through 18. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, "You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire. Just tag that. He had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. Jump down to verse 25. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself, so they said to him, "You also are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." Verse 26, one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" I'm pretty sure I saw what happened to my brother. Like, I'm pretty sure you were the dude that whipped out the sword and cut his ear. Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. I think the fascinating thing about this is as Jesus is sitting over this, he begins to or as Peter stands over this charcoal fire, he begins to distance himself. And he's like, I don't, everything that I had followed for 3 years, who has been here before? Everything that you believed about who Jesus was crumbled down. Because maybe you had a spouse you thought you absolutely loved you and you loved them, just abandon you. Or how about a church that you thought genuinely cared about you and all of a sudden they start to attack you? Or how about a job and finances that you thought were really setting themselves up well, and all of a sudden you get fired and then you can't get a job and then you fall into some things? Or you come with a chronic disease and you're just struggling, you're going, that's not the God that I was sold. That's not the God that I walked through for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. This isn't just a little hiccup in Peter's life. This is a complete, I don't know what all of this is about anymore. It throws him into chaos theologically, philosophically, lifestyle-wise, what his future was going to be, everything. He doesn't know what to do now. He doesn't know how to even proceed now. He doesn't, you imagine even what it did to his understanding of the entire Old Testament. I thought he was the Messiah. I thought he was the one that God had been talking about. I thought he was the one that everybody had been prophesying about. I thought he was this. So he starts distancing himself and pulling back. But then there's what I'm calling the Great Recommission. In John 21, turn with me to John 21. In John 21, I'm going to read a whole lot of verses here because I want us to hear what God says here and not what I have to say. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Again, take this mindset of I was following Jesus. I thought he was the way. I thought he was the future. I thought it was. It wasn't the fight that I thought. He then died. He's gone. So I'm going to go do the one thing that I know how to do. And apparently I can't even do that well. I can't even do the one thing I thought I could. The emotions of all of this are huge. Verse 4, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." I kind of wonder, I wish tone was what, like, "Hey, you got any fish?" You know, or was it like, "Do you have any fish?" Like, I mean, it'd be interesting. But anyway, keep going. That's not important. It's just how I read Bible. Verse 6, he said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." Jesus is telling them how to do their job, but they don't even know it's Jesus yet. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Verse 15, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Right here. Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." I'm going to pause there for the imagery. There's only 2 times in the Bible that word charcoal fire is used, and it's those two, linking the 2 stories. That Peter, at his weakest moment, at his most frustrated, at his most vulnerable time, denied Jesus in front of a charcoal fire, and then he purposely uses charcoal fire and asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" pulling this in. I think about all the other things that if I'm Jesus, I want to say, like, dude, really, what happened? Like, you missed it. Like, I want to correct it. I want to fix it. I want to step in and kind of go, you missed it. We had been talking. You followed me for 3 years. We had been having all this. I want to bring up like the slideshow of times he missed it and go, "You're an idiot." And I want to walk through all of that. Instead, he just sits with him over breakfast, over a charcoal fire, and reminds him of what he's called to do. There's this beautiful recommissioning. There's not a rebuke. There's a, "I love you. I love you." I love this concept, this idea of what happens here as he begins to sort through these concepts. And he does it 3 times to just pound him on. And it wasn't until the third, even the first time, he's like, "Yeah, I love you. Yeah, I love you." Oh, this 3 thing around a charcoal fire. And the one that I said I didn't know is now pulling me back in on a greater mission. He's essentially handing this newfound church over to Peter, saying, "You go, lead it, care for my people." He's shifting the war between swords to sheep. Drop down your swords. It's not about that. It's about sheep, and it's about people, and it's about leading. I love that concept. I love to fight with a sword. I'm just going to be honest. I'm good at it too. Like, my mouth is the most sword-like thing possible. And I will destroy you in a heartbeat, sadly. And Jesus is saying it's not that fight. It's not that fight. It's about sheep. It's about loving the sheep. It's about tending to the sheep. It's about feeding the sheep. It's not about the sword. And this is again, for Peter, he's still in this chaotic mode, right? This didn't fix him completely. He's still in this chaotic mode of trying to figure out what has just happened. This is like 3 days. Like, this is craziness that ensued in these 3 days of just totally throwing him for a loop. And I love that he begins to press this out. The other thing that I realize in this is that it's kind of retooling us into the gospel fight over our human fights. Our human fights is to take down the opponent. Our human fights is to take down the opposition. Our human fights is to correct whatever it is. And the gospel fight is, let's bring more people into the kingdom. I love, there was one time we were talking with a friend of mine, good mentor of mine, said, one thing he hates about church discipline is how do we get people out of the church instead of how do we get people in? And what's it look like to not discipline Peter, but to pull him back in? What happens if this is you, where you have denied Jesus, and the church is sitting by a charcoal fire going, come back in. It's okay. Instead, I want to go, Peter, no, you got to show me that you're not going to do this again. Right? I mean, you got to show me that you're not going to deny me. So we're going to put you in some situations. We're going to see how you behave. And if you do it right, it's about a 6-month process. And if you handle it correctly, you'll then go in our probation period. You'll have to wear, a little orange shirt, and we'll know who you are and what this is how we treat these things. And after denying him, 3 days later, Jesus is recommissioning him and going, go do good work. Go love people. Go serve people. Go spread the gospel to people. It's a completely different point of view. Let's keep reading in verse 18. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hand. That's a phrase for crucifixion. And another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. Verse 19. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. The exact same phrase he said when he was like, hey, come follow me. I want you to realize this. As you progress through the Christian life, you never move past following him. I love that with Peter, that he's just a fisherman hanging out, doesn't really know any of this. Jesus says, follow me. Now he's carried him for 3 years. He denied him. He pulled him back in. He's about to give him to the church, and his command is, follow me. This is so alleviating. You don't have to own anything. You don't have to try to win anything. Unlikely heroes understand, I'm just following him. I don't have to be the hero of the story. Amen. This is the most freeing thing that you can go through. Amen. I know this with my own family. I want to try to fix everything. I want to be the hero of my kids. I want to be the hero of my wife. I want to be the hero of my job. Instead of just follow him. Let him be the hero of my kids. Let him be the hero of my marriage. Let him be the hero of my job. It's completely freeing when I can fall into this. I don't think Peter could have got here if he didn't go through the charcoal fires. I think I need to go through some charcoal fires sometimes and sit in that. Turn with me to Acts 9. In Acts 9, 32 through 43. I'm going to read this quickly, but I love what begins to happen because now this is the great recommission. Now, as Peter went here and there among them all, he came down also to the saints who lived in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, bedridden for 8 years, who was paralyzed. And Peter said to him, I'm telling you, there's different translations. You can laugh at that, but that's how it does it. I tried to say Aeneas, and I got corrected. Bedridden for 8 years, who was paralyzed. And Peter said to him, somebody else, Jesus Christ heals you. Rise and make your bed. And immediately he rose. And all the residents of Lydda and Sharon saw him, and they turned to the Lord. Now there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha. This is my favorite. A disciple named Tabitha, which translated means Dorcas. So if that brings some clarity there. If you're wondering, what does that mean? She was full of good works and acts of charity. In those days she became ill and died, and when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent two men to him, urging him, please come to us without delay. So Peter rose and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other garments that Dorcas, which means Tabitha, if y'all are wondering, made while she was with him. But Peter put them all outside and knelt down and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, arise." And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. And he gave her his hands and raised her up. Then, calling the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with one Simon, a tanner. What I love is you're seeing this great recommission, where when Peter had this thought, this concept, and he comes up to the mountain, and he has his canoe, he now has to make a decision. Do I camp out here? Do I go back to what I knew? Or do I press into the unknown on the other side of the mountain? I'm going to have to step in and do some stuff, and I'm going to have to step up and carry out some stuff that's really, really powerful. What I also love about this is it begins to form what it looks like to live out the gospel and to begin to share the gospel and be recommissioned for the gospel. And I love this phrase. It's not just good news. When we talk about the gospel as good news, it's not just good information, right? Good information. I was thinking about this the other day, that when I have news on the TV says, hey, here's news. What are they telling me? They're telling me the weather, not a list of facts. They're telling me what actually might change what I wear, how I dress, how I'm going to go about my day. It's telling me about also the traffic. It's not just information of traffic, right? It's telling me how I should drive or what I should wait for or what I should. Good news changes your life. And so what I love is begins to happen is Peter goes in and begins to change the city. He begins to raise people from the dead. He begins to make an impact that is far exceeding just sharing gospel information. He begins to bring kingdom and gospel to the city. It's a great recommission of what he's called to do. It's a great change in what's happening. He goes from a sword of wanting to kill to bringing people back alive. It's a powerful thing when your words and your mission looks like this. When you begin to speak words that kill people or speak words that bring people to life. It's a great recommission that begins to happen. So as we walk through this, what I love in this whole concept is that right now you are standing over two different charcoal fires. One charcoal fire is one of chaos, concern, obscurity, vagueness, frustration. And you're there and you actually don't know. Your whole world has shifted. And you're standing over it, trying to warm yourself, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to be present. And this is what I love. Peter could have ran off. Instead, he still stayed kind of close to Jesus, but still in absolute chaos. Then you have the other charcoal fire, which is a commissioning. So you have a charcoal fire of chaos and a charcoal fire of commissioning. And the two different ones that you're standing next to. And it's okay to be at either one of them. I just want to say that. Because Peter wouldn't have got to Acts 9 if he didn't stand over the charcoal fire of chaos. The one thing you can't do is just not recognize that it's the charcoal fire of chaos. Don't just hang out warming yourself thinking that this is comfortable. Be honest about where you're at. Be honest that, man, I've hit a brick wall in who Jesus is. I've hit a brick wall in what the church is. I've hit a brick wall in what I think my life should be. And then as he moves over into that charcoal fire of commissioning, where he begins to say, he doesn't rebuke, he doesn't overcorrect, he doesn't shout at him, he does it over breakfast in a small voice and just says, hey, these three things I'm going to use your weakest point and recommission you and repurpose you and resend you out. And I love that illustration of what Jesus is doing through Peter. The most beautiful thing of being a part and being an unlikely hero is using your weakest thing when Jesus redeems it and recommissions you. It's one of the most powerful things in Scripture. Let's pray.